welcome to the Melting Pot speech. And this is the interview of John Perkins. And the interviewer is Kiman Lucas. Yes, there was one change, just a small, but I think we are going to enjoy this interview here on global stage of Melting Pot. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome on this interview about stopping the aliens behind the death economy, John Perkins and Kiman Lucas. Thank you.
Test. Thank you, Dennis. We appreciate you very much. So I just want to give you a little bit about my background. I'm an international attorney. I've been practicing law for 40 years, and I mostly have worked with a lot of companies, some governmental agencies, and also some nonprofit organizations. I've worked internationally. I've worked in Geneva for the World Health Organization. I worked in Denmark for Novo Nordisk, which is a pharmaceutical company. And I ran an international nonprofit for war victims. And we primarily worked out of Afghanistan and Cambodia and Laos and Vietnam and places like that. So I've known John for over a dozen years. And I can tell you that he's a bit of a rascal. So a little bit about John. He grew up in New Hampshire, which is on the east coast of the US. He spent 3 years in the Peace Corps in Ecuador, in the Amazon. He became an economist with a major consulting firm, and he ultimately decided that that was not something that he wanted to do, that it was hurting developing countries as opposed to helping them. And so he quit. And since then, he's written 11 books. He's a best-selling author. He was on the New York Times bestseller for over 70 weeks. His books have actually been translated into 38 languages. And I want to tell you a really short story about John that may or may not be a compliment, I'm not sure. Osama bin Laden was captured, as you may remember, in Pakistan years ago. And he had about 30 books in his library when he was captured. And one of them was John's Confessions of an Economic Hitman book. So I'm not sure that's good or bad, but I'll let you go from there, John.
Thank you, Kim, and thank you all for being here. It's great to be with you here. Yeah, so the good thing about the book being in bin Laden's bookcase is that there was a picture of it in the New York Times, so it sold lots of copies after that. So I think it was a good thing. So today, we've been going through, if some of you have been here previous to some of our previous events where I've been curating, I've been sitting in her spot, looking at really how do we transform a death economy to a life economy. And we'll get into this more in a little bit, but basically a death economy is an economic system that's consuming and polluting itself into extinction. In the short term, in order to maximize short-term profits and materialistic consumption, it depletes the resources it needs for the long term. A life economy is an economic system that pays people to clean up pollution, mine all the plastic in the oceans, rejuvenate destroyed environments, replant forests that have been destroyed, or take care of coral reefs, and pays people to recycle, to develop new technologies that don't ravage the earth, that enhance life instead. But the title of this, so it got a little mixed up in the program with the title, but that's okay. The title really is this: is stopping the aliens behind the death economy. And so it's based on this premise that what would we do? What would Russia do? What would China do? What would the United States do if there were suddenly these little green men, these aliens hovering above us? I think they would do very much like what Europe has done in the United States to stand up against the Russian invasion of Ukraine. I think all over the world we'd come together to fight the aliens. And I think that's the position we're in now. And I'll get into that in a little bit. The aliens are exactly like what we're showing on this picture. In fact, you and I are the aliens, and we'll get into that in just a moment. But first of all, I wanted to talk about the importance of perception. So if you think about it, there's no Czech Republic, there's no United States, there's no Russia, there's no China, there's no religion, there's no culture, there's no corporations except as we perceive them. And when enough people accept a perception or codify it into law, it has a huge impact on reality. Our perceptions, our mindsets create human reality and impact the whole planet. It's really all about perception. And the perception the perception of an economic hitman is going to be shown in this cartoon, which some of you may have seen before.
It's truly global empire, and it's basically a secret empire. We do it many ways, but principally, we identify a country that has resources our corporations covet, like oil, arrange a huge loan to that country from the World Bank or one of its sisters. The money never actually goes to the country. It goes to our own corporations to build big infrastructure projects in that country that help a few very wealthy people, but don't benefit the majority of the people who are too poor to buy electricity or have cars to drive on the highways, and yet they're left holding a huge debt that they can't repay. So we go back at some point and say, you know, you can't pay your debts. Give us a pound of flesh, sell your oil real cheap to our oil companies, vote with us on the next critical UN vote, allow us to build a military base in your backyard, something along these lines. And when we fail, the jackals go in and either overthrow or assassinate these leaders. And if the jackals fail, as they did in Iraq, then we send in the military. I don't think the failure is capitalism. I think it's a specific kind of capitalism where we've developed, we've created what I consider a mutant viral form of capitalism. And this mutant form of capitalism, which I think is really a predatory form of capitalism, has created an extremely unstable, unsustainable, unjust, and very, very dangerous world. I've met a lot of terrorists. I've interviewed them for books. I've never met one who wanted to be a terrorist. They're desperate people. If we want to get rid of terrorism, we must get rid of the root causes, that cancer that is destroying our whole system. Because I think it's really important that we understand today we cannot have homeland security unless we understand that the whole planet is our homeland.
So well, this comes later. Let's go. I don't know what it is, just ignore that for a moment. So our whole system, you know, Kiman mentioned that my title was chief economist at a major consulting firm, but I was really an economic hitman. That's what I did. And I've written about that in this book, Confessions of an Economic Hitman, which has sold millions of copies. But it's very humiliating and very humbling to know that a book it took me many years to write, and it's over 200 pages long, is summarized in that 2-minute cartoon very effectively. And while we're on to this humiliating and humbling subject, I just want to say, Kiman mentioned that she's known me for about a dozen years, and that we've been, how did you put it, companions, what did you say?
Companions and debate opponents.
That's putting it mildly. She's my greatest critic. We also live together. We're soulmates. But man, in a debate, she's a lawyer. I never win. But it helps me, it helps me understand better what's going on in the world. So getting back to this idea of perception and the death economy. This slide shows how the goals of an economic hitman strategy that creates a death economy, that was my job, was to create a death economy. We didn't call it that at the time. We thought we were doing good things, or some of us thought that for a while. But the goal of that is to maximize short-term profits and materialistic consumption, regardless of the social and environmental costs. That's a pretty terrible goal if you want to think about it. And to control resources around the world and to dominate the global economy. That was really my job. And one of the things I find interesting about this idea of short-term profits is that when I went to business school, that's not what I learned. I went to business school before 1976, which is a very important year. And I was taught that a good CEO earns decent rate of return for his investors, but also takes good care of the local communities where his business works, and takes good care of his employees, gives them health care and retirement pensions, and takes good care of his suppliers and his clients, his customers. That's what I was taught in business school. Make a profit, but you don't have to maximize the profit. Make a decent profit and do good things. And that all changed in 1976. It had been working up toward that. But in 1976, Milton Friedman won the Nobel Prize in economics. And later this afternoon, the last talk in here is going to be by one of Milton Friedman's students, Greg Palast. But
I might mention Greg Palast was one of the other books that Osama bin Laden had in his little library.
And so Milton Friedman was extremely popular around the world. He was highly respected by Reagan and Thatcher and many other world leaders. And so he said, as he won the Nobel Prize, probably his most significant statement was the only responsibility of business is to maximize short-term profits regardless of the social and environmental costs. And that gives CEOs not just the right, but in fact the mandate to do whatever it takes to maximize profits, including destroying the environment, including using up all the resources in the short term that their company will need in the long term, because most CEOs don't stay in power for more than 4 or 5 years, including sweatshops, basically enslaving people. That simple goal, and that's the goal of the death economy. So that goal, that idea has created this death economy, which, as I said before, is polluting and consuming itself. And there's a few examples, a few pictures of it. And now, today, we have an economic system that is devastating our planet. This system is what's causing climate change, income inequality, a great deal of social injustice, species extinctions, environmental destruction, so many problems. And today, the United States as an empire that's pushing this, what I did is kind of on the decline while China's on the incline. China's economic hitmen are now taking this to a new level. And so I want to show another very short video that I think...
The drive of empire builders to dominate their world has gone on for thousands of years. But it took a new turn in the 1970s when I was an economic hitman. The war in Vietnam, the debacle of Vietnam, pretty much proved that this could no longer be done through military forces. And so the idea was to dominate economically. And my job was to identify countries with resources our corporations wanted, like oil or minerals, other resources, and then to arrange a huge loan to that country from the World Bank or one of its sister organizations. The money had to go to our own corporations to build big infrastructure projects in that country, like electric power systems and industrial parks, things that benefited a few wealthy families in those countries, as well as our own corporations that made big profits. But it put the countries into deep debt. And then we basically owned them. They became part of our empire. We could dictate to them at what prices they would sell the resources that our corporations wanted. We could tell them to vote with us at the United Nations against Cuba or something else, and let us build a military base on their soil. We were extremely good at this. But now, along comes China. In this new book that I've written, which is really the 3rd edition of the Confessions of an Economic Hitman series, this one focuses on China's strategy. And China has learned from the mistakes that I and other economic hitmen from the United States made, and also from our successes. So China's doing a much more effective job It's taken over much of the world. It is the #1 trading partner, the #1 investor in countries all over the world: Africa, Latin America, the Middle East, Asia, even Europe, even the United States. And so China has really come to dominate this whole process. They have taken this economic hitman strategy to new levels. But what's important is to understand that no matter who uses this economic hitman strategy, whether it's the United States or China, it doesn't matter. It's taking us into destruction. It's taking us to climate change, income inequality, species extinction, environmental destruction. Those are all symptoms of the death economy, an economic system that's polluting and consuming itself into extinction. And it's run by one goal alone, and that is to maximize short-term profits and materialistic consumption. That's the goal of the United States as economic hitman. That's the goal of China's economic hitman. And so what we need to understand is this has to end. We're headed toward the precipice as humans on this planet. We've got to turn this around. And China and the United States can disagree on everything else. We can disagree on everything else. It doesn't matter what it is. We can fault them for what they're doing in Taiwan and Hong Kong. They can fault us for what we're doing in Iraq and Afghanistan and on and on. But let's agree that we've got to end climate change. We've got to end species extinctions. We've got to end environmental destruction. We've got to transform the death economy to a life economy. And this is where I find my book, New Confessions of an Economic Hitman, 3rd edition, to be extremely important. It's the best book and the most important one I've ever written. I'm totally convinced of this because it outlines a plan for how we can transform the death economy to a life economy. And it actually talks about how each individual can do this. It sets up a whole process whereby every reader, you, all of you, every reader, can look at what do I most want to do for the rest of my life? What'll bring me the greatest satisfaction? And how do I do this in a way that participates in transforming the death economy to a life economy? We are at an incredible time in human history. I feel blessed. We all should feel blessed. You should feel blessed that you're alive at this time where we have these huge challenges, but also an incredible opportunity to redefine, to redirect what it means to be human beings, being on this planet, this incredibly beautiful planet that we're inheriting, and we have a responsibility to pass on to future generations. We are at this incredible time in human history. Let's feel so blessed to be part of it. Thank you.
So that's where we're going to go today, is what can you do? That's where we're headed with this, is what can we each do as individuals and as a collective to turn this thing around. So I want to get back to this idea of the life economy. So before we know how we're going to turn this around, what is the life economy? So the goals of a life economy are the opposite of the death economy. This is to maximize long-term benefits for all life, not short-term profits. And businesses need to make a short-term profit in order to keep going, but they don't need to maximize them. Just like I was taught in business school, you know, make enough profit to keep going, but also take good care of your employees, take good care of the communities where you work. And in this case, it's the community where many of these corporations work is the entire planet. And to take good care of the environment of the entire planet and the people, clean up pollution. And, you know, so we pay people to mine the plastics that's drifting around out in the ocean. We pay people to plant trees where forests have been destroyed and to rejuvenate coral reefs that have been destroyed. We pay people on and on and on. There's so many different things we can do, and we're all familiar with how solar energy and wind power have taken over. You know, 20 years ago, even 10 years ago, we were told there's no way these are going to replace fossil fuels. And now they're cheaper than fossil fuels. I mean, we're in an amazing time. So we pay people to regenerate the destroyed environment. So well, you can see it. But one of the things I really like especially is to recycle and promote activities such as the arts, being in nature, and local communities. And this place where we're all at today is such a great model of that and of the transformation. Because here we are in a building that was built for the Soviet Union's largest steel mill. This was called the heart of Soviet steel, built on a coal mine. And then in the 1990s, the coal failed. They ran out of coal. The steel mill failed. This was a death economy. This was this economic system that was consuming itself, depleting itself towards self-destruction, and it self-destructed. But the people of this community and of the Czech Republic decided not to give in to despair, but instead to turn this incredible facility into a place to honor the arts, music, exchanges like this, to move toward a life economy. So this is an amazing model. You know, the Czech Republic needs to take a lot of credit, and particularly this community right here, for being such an amazing model of how we can transform the death economy to a life economy. And it goes on to develop lots of technologies and processes that enhance life. You know, we haven't even conceived of most of these yet. We're just at the initial stage. We're at the baby stage, even though we have to act very fast. As Bill McKibben, who was the speaker before me in the last hour, said, you know, we've got to get this done in 6.5 years. But at least we have to move very strongly in that direction. And so again, here's the death to a life economy. This incredible place, a magical fulfillment of iron and mysterious, a magical place full of iron and mysterious allies. This is directly from the website, and it is. I mean, this is my 3rd time teaching here, and I remember the first time I came here, we came here together, and walking around and seeing this phenomenal facility. And on that first time I spoke in the big auditorium, the Gong, which, you know, is this huge tank that used to house gases and petroleum, and now has been turned into a magnificent auditorium, as is this place. And it was only yesterday that I learned, actually, that the Nazis dropped a bomb on the Gong. And if it had exploded, this whole place would have gone up in flame. And they apparently didn't discover that bomb up there.
I think it was the Americans, actually.
Was it the Americans?
I think so.
Well, let's not talk about that. Really? Did we do such a, oh my God. Well, thank you, my dear. But it didn't go off, and they just discovered it apparently a few years ago when they were rejuvenating the Gong, and they found it up on the roof, unexploded. So now let's move into what you can do, because let's remember that while we're all victims of the death economy, we are also collaborators. We're all shoppers. Many of us are investors or workers or management or owners of businesses that are part of this process of maximizing short-term profits. You know, we're all part of this system, and it's really up to us to overcome it. An earlier discussion we had here on this stage was about the difference between autocracies and democracies. And I think it's important for us to recognize that there's a global democracy right now, and it's the consumer democracy. It's a global market, and we can see it as a democratic position to be in. How do we shop? How do we invest? And it's not just enough to shop correctly or invest correctly. We need to let corporations know why we buy from them or don't buy from them, and social media makes that so easy today. So moving forward, some of the things you can do to start with is, let's stop talking about them versus us. You know, I've taught at an MBA program in China. The Chinese people forget about governments. The Chinese people are as concerned as we are, perhaps more concerned than we are in the United States with pollution, because they've experienced terrible pollution. We in the United States have never experienced anything like that. And you here in the Czech Republic, right here, you experienced horrible pollution here. That's the steel mill and the coal mine. We don't want to go through that. And all over the world, all of us join together in this common sharing of needs: clean water, good air, good food, good homes. You know, who needs 700-foot yachts, or however big they are, you know, and private planes? If there's any of them, that's them, the billionaires. And let's look at us as a part of, not apart from our environment. So Kiman mentioned I've published 11 books, and 5 of those are on indigenous people. I spend a lot of time in the Amazon, and if any of you want to go with me to the Amazon or the indigenous people of Central America, go to my website, johnperkins.org. And I find that one of the amazing things about indigenous people, and we all come from indigenous people somewhere in our heritage, is that they see themselves as a part of nature. But we've defined ourselves as apart from nature. Human superiority, you know, I mean, we talk about white superiority, and that's a bad thing. But human superiority, the idea that we somehow are gods that can ravage the earth and use it any way we want. We've got to move beyond that. We are a part of, not apart from nature. And all of us can use social media, art, writing, whatever inspires you to inspire others to take action. And we'll get into some of those actions in a minute. And support leaders who guide us to what we call an ecological civilization, which is a civilization that's based on a life economy instead of a death economy. So these are just a few of the things that we can all do. And I want to go specifically into the idea of corporations, because I think we all know that corporations are probably the most powerful institutions in the world today. Something like if corporations were nations, 70 of the largest nations in the world would be corporations. Very, very powerful. So how we relate to corporations, how we shop, how we invest is important. So I would like to suggest that every one of you start a consumer campaign or join one. And if you pick a corporation that you want to see change something some way, and write them a very nice email or tweet, something like, "Dear so-and-so CEO of Corporate X, I love the product your company sells. I want your company to be an outstanding model." You know, be positive. "Therefore, I will not buy your product again until you stop polluting or clean up the pollution you've caused, or pay your workers in Indonesia or wherever a fair wage, or stop, you know, supporting Russian oil, or whatever it is you want to see changed." And then say, once that happens, I'll work to help you become the big business story. Your competitors will have to follow, but you will be the leader. You know, and then send that to the CEO and send it to all your social networking circles and ask them to send it to all their social networking circles. Start a consumer campaign or join one. And I know a lot of CEOs or other top executives, and almost all the ones I know, in fact, all the ones I personally know, want a better world. They have children, they have grandchildren, but they have to answer to Wall Street. They have to answer to their investors, and they have to answer to their consumers. And so I'm told time and time again, you know, I want to do the right thing, but I'm afraid that if I lose market share or my stock price goes down, I'll be fired. And I'll be replaced by someone who only cares about stock price or market share. So I got to stay in office to do the right thing. But what I really want is my consumers, my clients, to send me all these emails telling me to change. And when I have 100,000 of these, I take them to my main investors. And I tell them, listen, these are our clients. We have to listen to them. We have to give them our ear. We have to change. And I know so many corporate executives that are in that kind of a position. I also know some that are sociopaths, and they don't give a shit about any of this stuff. But they're also not driven by profit. They're driven by success. And if we can define success as being those companies that are serving the long-term interest, as well as making enough short-term profit to stay in business, then the sociopaths will be the first to jump on the bandwagon because they want to be the best in their field. You know, the narcissists, the sociopaths. So we have incredible power to impact these corporations. I have a very good friend who's a chief marketing officer for HP, which used to be called Hewlett-Packard. And he recently went to the Amazon with me. He's very proud of the fact that HP was selected by Newsweek magazine last year as the #1 most socially and environmentally responsible company in the United States. And he says one of the reasons we're able to be in that position is that our investors, like Warren Buffett is one of the ones he mentions, our investors understand the importance of the long term. And so do our insurance companies. And insurance companies are driving a lot of that now. So that's something we can all do around corporations, and it seems like a small thing. All you got to do is send out an email or a text and send it to all your social networking circles and encourage them to send it. But it's a big thing. It can have tremendous power. We've seen over the years the power that coming together, organizing, creates. You know, I remember, you know, being opposed to the war in Vietnam in the United States. And what ended that war more than anything else was people coming together on the streets. And we still see that happening. But now we can also do it. If you want to go out on the streets, that's very powerful. Do that too. Bill McKibben, who was here before, said how many times was he in jail? 7? No, a dozen at least. But you don't have to do that. You can do social media, and that's a big, big step. I also encourage you to go to jail, if you feel like it. But now Bill McKibben, I don't know how many people are here, but he says he's now a little bit too old to that, so they bought all these rocking chairs, and his people in the third act movement sit in rocking chairs to demonstrate. Anyway, so what else can we do? Well, there's 5 different life world-changing questions that each of us can ask ourselves. And I think this is what can really drive all of us forward. So the first question you want to ask yourself, what will bring me the most satisfaction and joy? Because I got to say, you know, if you're not feeling satisfied and joyful, you're probably not going to be successful for very long. Oh, you might make a lot of money. I know some people like that and we're not happy at all. You got to follow your heart, follow your bliss, as Joseph Campbell said. What will bring me the most satisfaction and joy? And a couple of examples. So for me, I would say, I want to write. I love to write books. I just absolutely love to write. It's one of my greatest, other than arguing and debating with you, it's one of my greatest pleasures in life. But I have a friend who's kind of at the opposite end of the spectrum. He's a carpenter. He likes to work with his hands in wood. That's what he wants to do for the rest of his life. And all of us have something, so really identify what do you most want to do for the rest of your life. And then the second question is, how can doing this transform the death economy into a life economy? So you want to do what you most want to do for the rest of your life in a way that creates the life economy. So as a writer, I would say, I'm going to write about this. I want my writings to inspire people to become part of this movement to create this life economy. My carpenter friend will say, I want to use only sustainable materials. I'm going to make sure that every tree that we use gets replanted. Third question, what's blocked me or might block me from doing number 1 and number 2? And so, as a writer, I might say, well, I know to be a successful writer, I've got to write every day. But, you know, I just don't have time to write every day. I might say that. And my carpenter friend might say, well, my clients don't want to spend the extra money to buy sustainable materials. But whatever we're involved in, there's always something that tells us, oh, you really can't do this, you don't want to do it, whatever that is. So you identify what's blocked you. And then the fourth question you ask yourself is, when I confront my blockages, how do my perceptions change? So remember, we go back to that original slide of those two guys looking at the number 9 or number 6, seeing it different ways. Perception molds reality. So for a writer, I would say, well, I can change my perception from the idea that I don't have enough time every day to the idea that I can turn off the television for an hour or 2 every day and write. That will give me an extra 7 or 14 hours a week, and that's actually quite a lot for a writer. And my carpenter friend says, well, I'll tell my clients that the extra price they're paying is not an extra cost. It's an investment in the future for them and their children. They're investing, and we can all come up with these changes of perceptions. How do we move beyond our blockages? The book I wrote before the 3rd edition of Confessions of an Economic Hitman was called Touching the Jaguar. And I learned that in the Amazon, the indigenous people have the same concept that anything that's holding us back, they visualize as a jaguar standing in the path. And if you run from that jaguar, it chases you. If you run from the things that are blocking you, oh, you're not good enough looking, you don't have a good enough education, you don't come from the right country, you don't speak the right languages, you know, whatever it is. If we run from that, it chases us. But if we touch it, it gives us the power to change our perceptions. However, if you go into the Amazon and you see a real jaguar, I don't recommend touching it. But I don't recommend running from it either. That doesn't work. They chase you. You know, you gotta do it. You gotta grin it down. You move slowly away from it. So the fourth question is, the fifth question, the final question, what actions do I take right now? So I gotta write. If I'm a writer, I gotta write. And my carpenter friend says, you know, I got to build things with sustainable materials, and I got to tell the people, my clients and their children, about it. Look, you know, we built this cabinet here, or we built this house with sustainable materials because we're investing in your future. We're investing in the future. And it may cost us a little bit more, but it's an investment, not a cost. The price may be a little higher, but it's an investment, not a cost. And, you know, as we look at these 5 questions, I would just like to say, it's not a bad idea to ask these questions every week, or maybe every day, because the first 2 may not change. They might change, but they might not change, but they might change over time. But the last 3 probably will frequently change. So once I've decided that I don't have to give in to the idea that I don't have enough time to write, then I have to decide what's blocking me from deciding what to write. And then I have to decide, well, what's blocking me from writing the first sentence, the first paragraph? What's stopping me? What's distracting me? And so those last 3 questions, and what actions do I take, you know, we can repeat those fairly frequently. But the most important point of all of this is to say, you know, do what you most want to do for the rest of your life. Don't wait. Whatever age you're at, don't wait any longer. Do it, and do it in a way that transforms the death economy to a life economy. And don't give in to perceptions that hold you back. Negative perceptions, you know. We can look at the world as saying, you know, we're on a course of self-destruction. Nothing I can do about it, and then we'll have destruction. Or we can say, there's some actions I think I can take and pull us out of this, and then we've got a good chance of pulling out of it. So I'm going to end this very quick soon with this final idea about the aliens. So, you and I are the aliens, because we see ourselves as apart from, not a part of nature. So I'm not saying that human beings are aliens. We're not. Well, maybe we are. Was that, who is that from? I have often thought the CIA is watching me most of the time, and maybe they're just checking in, you know. But, oh, did I just screw up the cameras? Sorry, guys. Yeah, it's okay. So it's our attitude as human beings that we define ourselves as apart from, superior over nature. That's what we have to change. And if we can all come together, people from China, well, let's forget about the governments for a while, but as people, let's come together, and let's come together with the corporations which have so much power right now. And maybe at some point we can get rid of them, but right now let's come together, whether we're from China or the Czech Republic or from Tibet or India, Brazil, wherever we're from. Let's come together and agree that there are no winners on a dead planet. And we're killing life as we know it on this planet. We are the aliens. So if we can come together and say, you know, we can disagree on, like I said in the video, you know, that we can blame the Chinese for what's going on with the Uyghurs. They can blame people in the United States for what's going on with our immigration problems and all the people we have incarcerated in jails, and on and on and on. But let's agree that in order to survive on a planet any of us will recognize, we need to come together to transform the death economy to a life economy. And the final slide, I just want to give an honor to, I want to honor my editor. And I do my own writing, but I'm inspired by this amazing editor. Her name is Jaggy. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
If anybody has a question, if you raise your hand, then someone can bring a mic to you. And in the meantime, John, so you claim that the CIA, the jackals, you call them the CIA, or I call them the CIA, you call them the jackals, have overthrown and even assassinated different leaders in other countries. Why do you believe this?
Yeah, so I didn't get into that in the talk, but the economic hitmen, when we fail, what people we call the jackals, who are usually CIA assets, not necessarily employees, but assets, step in and they either overthrow governments or assassinate their leaders. And what makes me feel this? Well, Henry Kissinger, our Secretary of State, admitted to having done this in places like Vietnam and Chile with Pinochet and Iraq and other places. We have a long record, unfortunately, of doing these things. And so to me, it's not a supposition. It's a fact that we've admitted in some cases, and there's so many other cases that we haven't admitted to. I had two clients, the president of Ecuador, Jaime Roldos, and the head of state of Panama, Omar Torrijos, who refused to play the economic hitman game. They wouldn't buy into my, what I was trying to sell them, what I've shown you on here, as an economic hitman. They wouldn't take on this debt and put their countries in these precarious positions. And both of them died in very suspicious private plane crashes, less than 3 months apart from each other. And there's never been a smoking gun on those, because a plane crash, if you want to assassinate someone, you make sure it's someone that has a private plane, because when the private plane goes down, the smoking gun goes down with the plane. So those are two that I can't prove, but the United States has admitted to many of these, as has Russia, as have many other countries.
Okay, so you've been criticized as being anti-American. And I just want to know, what do you specifically dislike about the US and why? And do you think China or Russia are better models?
That's a lot of questions. God, I hate it when she asks me questions. There's a real risk having her up here on stage with me. I'm not anti-American at all. I'm incredibly strong patriot. My family fought in the American Revolution. But I feel that democracy is based on self-criticism. We have to criticize our mistakes. We have to identify our mistakes and do a better job. And so I see that as part of my job, is to expose things that I know that we made terrible mistakes doing, and then try to come up with solutions as to how we can change this. That's what, if you don't have that, you don't have a democracy. What was the second part of the question?
I just wondered what you thought about China or Russia by comparison.
Yeah, they're not democracies. And I would much rather live in a democracy, as messy as that can be and as difficult as it is. And certainly the United States right now is going through a very dysfunctional period. And it makes it tough. You know, when I speak Spanish, I spend a lot of time in Latin America. And, you know, I talk to leaders there and elsewhere, and they'll say, you know, I think we'd rather have the Chinese system than the American system because yours seems so dysfunctional now. And it may be dysfunctional, it may have been over time, but I think in the end democracy comes through, and it's certainly a better system.
Does anybody else have a question? Yes, please. Could you state your name first?
It's okay? Yeah, fine, thank you. It was nice to hear you. Thank you for this discussion. And I've got questions in the context of your speech. What do you think about activities of last generation, if you know, sure.
About the activities of what?
Activities of last generation, when they stick to the pictures, when they stick to the highways and these activities. So what do you think about these activists? And another question is about leaders, because I think that if we want to make change, so there is big importance of leaders, of personalities which will inspire us. If you see some leaders who are inspiring for this change of mindset of people, of population. Thank you.
With respect to the first question, and I'm not sure we heard you completely, but I just it made me think of something that John once won the Lenin-Ono Peace Prize, and he won it the same year as Lady Gaga and Pussy Riot. And as you all know, Pussy Riot, maybe you don't, I don't know, did lots of protesting in Russia, and they were put in jail and weren't allowed to come for the ceremony because of it. But I think they're an example of that.
Yeah, and I gotta say, spending a week or 5 days, we spent 5 days in Reykjavik, Iceland with Lady Gaga and Yoko Ono, and that was quite an experience. So, yeah, I mean, I think I'm not sure I quite understood the question either, but I think what you were asking is how I feel about the Russian invasion of Ukraine?
No, protest in general by people that block things.
Yeah, I think protests are very important. I think it's part of democracy, and it's part of getting rid of autocracy also. I think it's important, but I also don't think it's for everyone. I used to do it when I was young for the Vietnam War, and I got trampled by a policeman on a horse once or twice, and I decided that wasn't for me any longer. I'd rather write. So I think that, you know, we have to do what really appeals to us, and I'm all for protesters, and I'm all for people who put their bodies on the line that way. I think that's a wonderful thing, but if it's not for you, use social networking protests instead, or find another way to do it. And as far as leaders are concerned, unfortunately, I'm not very optimistic about our current leadership anywhere. I think Biden has done a decent job with some of his new anti-inflation package, where he wants to support solar and wind and new infrastructure that does that. But at the same time, he's also doing things that promote gas and oil pipelines. So it's a very tough job to be a leader today in the world, and I think we have to recognize that. So what's, I think, important is that we all come together to try to encourage much better leadership. And for young people who are coming up and are dissatisfied with the way the world is today, to make a commitment to get out there and learn leadership skills and take over and not be corrupted by the system. It's so easy to be corrupted by the system. And it's up to us to create the leaders, to insist on good leadership, to push for that, and to protest on however we want to protest, whether it's demonstrating in the streets or through emails or whatever. It's really up to us. We have to take that responsibility. Thanks for that question. I appreciate it. And thanks for getting me out of having her ask me questions. And I think there's another one back there now too.
Can you hear me? Yeah, okay. You mentioned World Bank, and I think a lot of us don't know how World Bank or other international organizations like International Monetary Fund works on paper, and you mentioned that they do not play a good role in that life economy. So could you describe to us how these international organizations like IMF or World Bank in reality works?
Ooh, yes, it's complex and it changes over time. And I would like to say that I think the World Bank was created at the end of World War II at the Bretton Woods Conference, which were held in my native state in the United States of New Hampshire. And it was created to reconstruct a devastated Europe after World War II. And I think it did a pretty good job, along with the Marshall Plan and so many other things. I think they did a good job. But then the Cold War came up. And the World Bank saw its goal as being to combat communism. And so it supported huge corporations in every way it could. And it supported development projects that basically put countries deep into debt to the United States. And once they were in debt to the United States, the United States kind of owned them. Or maybe not just the United States, but other countries that were part of NATO. And it kind of got stuck there. So after the Soviet Union collapsed in '91, the bank continued in that process. And the IMF is basically the policing force. So when I use both of them as an economic hitman, so I arranged the loans through the World Bank. Loans came in through the World Bank, and the collateral was oil or whatever the resource was in a country. When the country couldn't pay its debt, and first of all, I want to say that the money, the debt itself, never really went to the country. It went to U.S. corporations, primarily U.S. corporations, who made big profits out of building infrastructure projects in the country. Things like electric power systems, highways, ports, airports, industrial parks. And these things helped the very rich people in those countries, as well as making big profits for the American corporations. That helped the people who owned the businesses and the industries that benefited from much more stable electricity, from better transportation systems, and all the other infrastructure. But the majority of the people actually suffered because money was diverted from education, healthcare, and other social services to pay the interest on the debt. And in the end, the country couldn't repay the principal. And this was, in a way, part of the economic hitman strategy. And so at that time, we go back in the guise of the IMF and say, hey, since you can't pay your debt, sell your collateral, your resource, your oil or whatever it is, real cheap to our corporations with very few, or if any, environmental and social regulations. Allow us to build a military base on your soil. Privatize your public sector businesses and sell them to our investors. Vote with us on the next United Nations vote against Cuba or whatever. And so this whole process was one of really colonialism. It was colonizing through finance rather than through the military, because we'd learned in the Vietnam War that no matter how powerful an army you have, it doesn't necessarily defeat people in a country like Vietnam. And I think Russia's learning this lesson once again in Ukraine. So the idea of colonizing through debt became a very, very powerful one. Now, I think things are beginning to change somewhat. And part of the reason the World Bank is modifying itself somewhat is because China has created a law, the BRICS Bank, which is Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, but it involves a lot of other countries, and the Asian Infrastructure Development Bank. And it's gone in and directly competed with the World Bank and the IMF. And so I think now the World Bank and the IMF are really re-evaluating this whole process. And my hope is that ultimately something better will evolve out of this for both BRICS, for all three, BRICS, AIID, and there's others, the Export-Import Banks and USAID and so on. But one of the previous speakers here talked about how we really seem to be rising toward a new consciousness. And I believe that. I believe that I travel around the world a lot, speaking at many events, including I spoke in Russia just before the pandemic, and China, and all over. And everywhere I go, I find that people are waking up, just as we are here. People are coming together to discuss these things. And there's a change of consciousness that we need to transform the death economy to a life economy. And I can only hope that the banks and the bankers are understanding this too. And to some extent they seem to be, and as well as the corporate executives. But we still got a long way to go with that, and you and I have to push them. But thanks very much for asking that. That's in a nutshell, it's a pretty complicated system, that whole banking system, but that's kind of in the nutshell my experience with it.
So I think we just have one more minute. I don't know if you want to give a parting shot or if there's one more question.
I'll give a parting shot.
Okay.
I don't know as I like that expression, a parting shot. I think I'd like to say that I feel that I'm blessed to be born when I was born and to be alive now. And I think all of you, all of us here, should feel very, very blessed to be alive at this moment in human history, because we're going through an incredible evolution. As Bill McKibben said in the previous session here, he said, this world that we're living in is like no other time in human history. It's totally different. It's as though we're on a different planet. And we are, because we've created a different planet. This climate change, the rising oceans, the melting glaciers, all of these things. At the same time, there's an incredible rise in consciousness that is happening all over the planet. And I think that's something very, very magical about this moment in human history. And it's easy to get discouraged, but it's also easy to say, look, when things are down, when we're challenged, that presents a tremendous opportunity to create something new, to move into a new epoch, a new era. And I think we're doing that. So I think all of you out there should feel very, very blessed to be alive now, whatever age you are. If there's any regret I have, it's that I'm not going to be able to experience this process for too many more years. I don't know how many more. I'm 78 years old. How many more? I don't know. But I'm glad to be here now. And you who are younger, I envy you. I think you're coming into a very challenging time, but a time of incredible opportunities, a time to spread your wings and really soar. This is a phenomenal time to be alive as human beings on this planet. Enjoy it and do what you most want to do for the rest of your life, and do it in a way that transforms the death economy to a life economy. Your microphone's off. Push it up.
Okay, I think that's it. So thank you, guys.